Today's episode had me sitting with Jonas Diezun. Jonas is the co-founder of Razor Group, an aggregator out of Europe who are obviously buying Amazon FBA brands. We have a pretty interesting discussion about the landscape of aggregators in general, a little bit about their growth trajectory and aspects that we think might actually challenge or disrupt the model and everything in between, what it is to be driven and motivated to start and create businesses and, interesting aspects. I mean, he has an engineering background. And for me, I'm always curious chatting with engineers. So again, like always, I hope you enjoy this one as much as I did. Welcome to Successful Scales, the show where I talk to world-class professionals on what it takes to scale successful businesses. I dive deep asking questions to people who are running unicorn businesses, to raising funds, to buying businesses, mergers and acquisitions, IP and patent law, what is to manage performance management. I mean, the list goes on. The idea really is, how do I create knowledge and learning for you guys listening in? And of course, myself, getting the floor with people who I, in many cases, would never dream to share a room with. Before we jump into the episode, I've got to give a special thank you to our sponsors. Firstly, over at Global Wide Advisors, a leading digital consumer products investment bank focused on optimizing the sales process. An incredible team, always happy to pick up the phone and educate you or anyone about the sales process and what you should really consider, and can obviously help take you to market or even acquire businesses. I ring them for just about everything these days. Us over at Multiply Me, we are the end-to-end executive search and HR function into the Philippines, helping find better talent and onboarding them effectively. And last but not least, Escala, our management consultancy focused on process improvement, where we help build better systems for your business. That's all the ads you're going to get from me, ladies and gentlemen. The rest is all about learning. I hope you really enjoy and get as much out of these sessions as I do, sitting face-to-face with some of the world-renowned leaders in their respective fields, asking them the tough questions that they're not often asked. Jonas, welcome to an episode of Successful Scales. My friend, how are you doing?
Great. Thanks for having me here. It's really good that we finally made it.
I know. We've had a few reschedules. We're having a chat about Prosper, time zones, challenges, but we're finally here, and I am super excited to dive in. I've been following along what you guys are up to, and I don't want to butcher it. So I'd love you to give those listening who may not have heard of Razor Group, before we even go into the Razor Group story, I'd love to hear a little bit about you and your background so people understand why you're on the show in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. So Jonas, one of the co-founders of Razor, actually, and I grew up in Germany, in Düsseldorf, and then moved to Munich to study there. And my background is actually in management and technology. So I studied electric engineering as a minor. But interestingly, never really worked with it. So after and even during my studies, I always was attracted to building things and building companies. And this is what I did now for the past almost 15 years. Yeah, I founded a couple of companies. The first one was actually in New York on my couch. Yeah, so I did a semester in New York, and I was having a friend over, and he was having these caps. And then we just said, okay, let's sell them on the internet. And we founded a company and started a Shopify store and actually sold them, which was super fun because we got a lot of celebrities wearing it. And we had Paris Hilton and Lewis Hamilton, etc., wearing them, which was a lot of fun. And then kind of went on to build a couple of companies, mostly in Europe, actually. One was a bit more on the technical side around sensors and analytics for large corporations, but then founded two D2C brands in Europe, one around sleep products and the other one around aligners, so similar to Invisalign, actually.
Wow. I know you saw me writing down a ton of notes here, but I mean, already just super interesting. We were talking before, but in Escala, our consulting practice, we have 20 management consultants. Most of them would be industrial engineers, so not electrical, but industrial engineers. But I find that when I'm speaking to anyone who's studied engineering, their mind, either before they became an engineer or post, it sort of works in a particular way, and it's unique in its ability to build structure and build process. And so when you talk about a passion for building businesses, I mean that makes a lot of sense to me. So tell me when you said that you studied electrical engineering, but you actually didn't practice at all. What happened there?
Yes. So my focus was actually on energy engineering. So all around power plants and then actually electric batteries for electric cars. And I found this always extremely interesting. But I think what I was more attracted to ultimately was like also fast-paced environments, right? And engineering sometimes just takes a really long time. If you build hardware or if you sell to B2B customers, like you typically have sales cycles that are extremely long, or development cycles, which was something I saw as a downside. So ultimately, I was more attracted to this fast-paced environment. And this is actually something that we see a lot with the sellers that we talk to or where we acquire businesses. And you mentioned that engineering kind of shapes the mind. And I would say that really a high percentage of the sellers that we talk to have an engineering background, which I really find fascinating. I would say probably like 30 to 40% even, which is really interesting.
That is very interesting, and I'm going to dig in a little later on in this session here, because I'm very curious. I've spoken to Forum Brands and D1 Brands and Intrinsic and Elevate and a lot of the guys, and everyone has their own strategy. But that's going to be. I'd love to hear a little bit about sort of the people that you're targeting. But going back to you before we sort of dive into aspects, because like I said, super interesting. I mean, you said you have a passion for building companies and the fact that it's all about that fast-paced nature. I would struggle as well, if you're talking about engineering, and I can only imagine the levels or the layers of reviews and approvals and things that you need to pass through in order to get something live. When you talk about energy, batteries and energy, you're probably talking about 2, 3, 4 year production cycles, and that can feel like an eternity when you're geared toward being an entrepreneur. So what specifically is it that excites you about building businesses? There's a lot of people listening here who are entrepreneurs, aspiring entrepreneurs, people who are looking to build businesses. And when you approach it, my first question is, what is it that attracts you? What's the exciting part about it, and how do you approach it? For someone starting out, what's the fundamentals?
Yeah. So there are a lot of possible avenues to answer this question, but I think the most important one is personally, I really like to see progress. Yeah. So every day and every week you see, okay, I accomplished something. Yeah. And we really moved forward. And this is something that I just personally, need. Yeah. It's for me, it's extremely hard that you kind of look back and then we didn't really accomplish anything. Yeah. So that's a huge motivation and a driver for me personally to actually push and really just make progress. I think the second point is there's always, when you grow and when you scale, there's a certain type of complexity or chaos, maybe even. Yeah. So you do something, you have no ideas, you have information that is unstructured, and you actually need to digest that, and you need to bring this into something that you can actually work with. Yeah. So it's a lot around like making complexity and chaos understandable and manageable, which I think is always an interesting challenge, because there are so many different ways how you can handle that, right? So maybe you have tons of information which you need to structure, or maybe you have a lot of people that you need to talk to, and you always need to find different paths. So there is like on the one side, that's you can have it in a relatively organized process, but you always need creativity also to find new avenues how to solve that. Yeah. So this is really what I find exciting, because it's always something new too. And then I think the third point is it's a lot about people as well. Yeah. When you grow a company, ultimately, everybody will tell you need to hire, you need to have excellent people on the team. And you also need to build and upskill the people or enable them that you have in the company, which I find very interesting, challenging. Yeah. But this is a lot of fun too, and a huge challenge at the same time.
Spoken like a true engineer. The unstructured information, how do I put it into something that's actually manageable, take the creativity and bring it all together? I love it. And, and as someone going through, a different but similar journey as well, it is absolutely, it's like you you figure out that problem and you solve it, and then you've unlocked 10 more problems that you didn't foresee when you're hitting that next layer. For you guys, yeah, there's the acquisition side, and this is something that I feel like we could have a pretty interesting conversation about, but it's, well, what do I actually do when I've acquired 5, 10, 50 brands and they've gone from 5, 10, 50, 150, $1 billion, the ever-changing landscape of a business that's both growing at that pace and bringing in so many moving components. I mean, even just talking about this right now, I sit here being excited about what the challenge would be to grow an aggregator. So do you know what? Before we dive into some of those, I would say more current topics or things that you probably deal with on the day-to-day and would be a great look in. What, for anyone who might not have heard of Razor Group and what you guys are about, I mean, what's the driving mission? Who are you speaking to? What's the objective? Whoever's been living under a rock and hasn't heard of you, please let them know.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So what we do is we acquire and grow e-commerce brands. Yeah, very, very simply put. So we focus mostly on Amazon brands, actually. So brands that have developed great products or built great products on Amazon and have great positioning there. And what we do is we acquire those brands and actually grow them further. Yeah. So for us, it's not about like just acquiring the business and keeping it stable. For us, it's really using additional resources, using additional leverage that we have in the company to then really make these brands into something that is like not present only on Amazon anymore, but potentially also on other channels, and really can become a big brand. Yeah? And this is what we do, kind of a bit of background. So we started back in Germany last year, and then pretty much expanded first to the UK, then to the US, and now actually pretty much all over the world. What we look for and what we see is ultimately we talk to a lot of great entrepreneurs that build businesses. Yeah. And what we ultimately look for are businesses that on one side are already doing well, but on the other side also still offer us potential to actually grow this further, which is always an interesting mix and always an interesting balance that we want to find and look for.
For sure. I mean, you're acquiring a business to realize the upside. So, I mean, you speak to tons of sellers, right? You said 30, 40% are effectively engineers. What are some of the key challenges that a lot of these sellers are actually experiencing where they'll come and they'll say, I mean, obviously, right? Anyone's going to come and say, right, I've got an opportunity to have the biggest payday of my entire life. You might have spent 3, 2, 5 years building an Amazon business without actually truly realizing real ROI, but that exit is life-changing money. But what are some of the challenges? Why are people coming to you guys, or when you're reaching out to them, or whatever your sort of acquisition strategy looks like? What are the things that you're hearing in the space today as challenges?
Yeah. So it really depends on the phase of the company. Yeah. So I think when you grow a company from like 0 to 1 million, that's a different challenge than from 1 to 5 million, and then potentially from 5 to 20, 50 million. Yeah. And with each of these phases come different challenges. Yeah. And what I would say is that typically this is either like more on the personal side. Yeah. As you mentioned, some people just ultimately they've never seen the money that they're actually making. Yeah. So it's for them like making a payday. But there are also other personal reasons that it can actually play a role. Something like after 4 years, maybe you just want to move on, you want to do something new. And maybe you actually like the phase where you build the company from 0 to I don't know, to a couple of millions. And then you say, okay, now it's a bit boring. All the processes are in place, et cetera, et cetera. On the other side, I think there are a lot of commercial reasons why you would sell. Yeah? And this sometimes goes hand in hand with personal reasons as well. But for example, what we often see is that people say, okay, there are so many opportunities out there. Yeah? And for me, like now, it's just really hard to exploit them. Yeah? Because I'm really good at like doing the Amazon listings. I'm really good in like launching new products. But now what I actually have to do is I have to hire more people. Yeah? And this is not really what I want to do. And I'm not the great manager, yeah, which is per se a different skill set. And then they decide, okay, maybe it's time actually to move on and do something else. And then what they see is that when they work with us, actually, that we can like work on some of these potentials a lot faster than they could ever do it.
Yeah. And, as someone who's gone through, before we hit record, I was saying, building to middle management and senior management and having, cadences around that. I mean, it's a very different reality. Sometimes when I tell people that we grew from 4 to 140 in like 13 months, the first thing you hear is, "I'm so sorry for you." It's an ever changing landscape. And so something interesting that I feel that comes up every other recording, every time I'm sitting down with someone, is a guy by the name of Tyler Jeffcoats. He's got a company called Seller Accountants, and he did a study. He's probably got 200 plus clients, and he said that from 0 to 1.5 million is typically where you see sellers making the most money, or they're the most profitable. And once they hit that 1.5 million mark through to 4 million, they really struggle. They struggle with profitability, and it's because of that exact shift that you're outlining. It's the fact that when once I was an owner operator and I was able to simply deliver on what I was supposed to deliver on, now I have to start bringing in management. I have to relinquish control. And I think for the person who is the startup guy or girl, they're interested in the build phase. They're interested in creation. Once they get to managerial, they either don't have the ability to deliver or they don't have the passion.
Yeah, absolutely. What we also see in addition to that is like sometimes, like when you start, you're really well off like being a generalist, because even on Amazon there are so many things that you have to take care of. You have to talk to your suppliers, you have to make sure that all your plans with Amazon are at the right time being done. You need to optimize the listings, etc., etc. And then when you grow, like all of these smaller tasks don't become that exciting anymore. And then sometimes we talk to sellers and we're like, "Hey, we looked at your listings, we think like A, B, C, and this is a list of items that we see. Why don't you just do it?" And they're like, "Yeah, I could, but I don't really mind anymore." So it's something where I would need to hire specialists actually for, and then this doesn't happen.
And that makes a whole lot of sense to me. Is that when people are going through this potentially for their first time and even their second time, they're not cognizant of who they need and how to actually build out those processes or systems, or moving away. Like the term VA frustrates me. I can't tell you how much I hate it, because what you're doing is you're bringing a low-level generalist into typically businesses where you need very focused professionals. If I had to imagine, or if you looked under the hood of Razor, I'm sure you're seeing a dedicated PPC specialist. You're seeing a dedicated logistics or supply chain manager. You're looking at dedicated professionals who are driving their one unique skill set. And I think that's one of the things that people sort of miss when they're the startup girl or guy, and they aren't aware that it's not about squeezing every penny. It's about doubling down and saying, "I'm going to bring in the talent that's going to actually see true growth." So in that vein, I mean, and it's funny, I've gone through this journey now, recording about 50 of these podcasts now, speaking to a lot of very, very bright people. And, I'm learning a lot about the space, and I've spoken to a lot of aggregators, and I'm trying to figure out what the end game is, right? So you're creating these efficiencies, right? You're acquiring the business. You have a lot of capital behind you. So you solve, I would say fundamentally, okay, what's going to be a problem for a seller? They can't afford to continue to rebuy the inventory and the growth, or they take on capital, but they can't actually pay it back at a rate where it makes sense, and therefore they're not profitable. So they're growing, they're not scaling. So that's obviously a problem that you guys don't have, which is obviously very nice. But is it to sell to private equity? Is it to sell to a strategic? Is it to IPO? And you don't have to give me your direct strategy, but are those the things, are these the things that we should be expecting, do you think, across the board for aggregators in the coming years? What's your take on the climate?
So I think there are many different possible avenues that could happen for some of these aggregators. I mean, definitely IPO or private equity. Let's see how this develops. And also, from our side, this is something that we are constantly thinking about and obviously also have plans for. But let's see step by step. I think the beauty of the model, and also what we right now see, is that there is still massive potential in many different ways. So really, when you think about these brands that you acquire, what can you do with them? And for some of these brands, we really have a lot of plans, and we are now we are starting to execute on this, and we're starting really to think about these brands not for the next 6 months, but we really think about, okay, where does this lead us to in 3 to 5 months, 3 to 5 years? So there's a lot of potential potential that we right now see and really are mostly focused on executing there. And this is, I think, the beauty of the model right now, that this still offers a lot of opportunities. And well, definitely what in general our plan is, or what we see also with others, is you have certain clusters that emerge, and you start building on these clusters. I mean, simple example is always sports. But in sports, you can do a lot of different things. You can obviously focus on the products that you sell on Amazon, but you can also extend this. You can like combine this with digital medium or apps or something like this. And this is what we're going to see, I think, in the future, that really out of these clusters and these brands, really big players emerge as well. And apart from that, the beauty also is that it's a very profitable business model ultimately, if you manage your growth right, which enables you just to build a very profitable and big company going forward.
Yeah, it's very interesting, or very different, for example, to SaaS companies. I always find it so interesting or almost frustrating in a way. I mean, you're building businesses when we talk about the acquisition of FBA or e-commerce businesses, creating efficiencies, selling them in additional, more dispersed brands, or building clusters and building sort of buying power, or, going down a category focus, whatever it looks like, to really, cross-pollinate what it is you're delivering. Whereas technology companies like ClickUp, which we use and love as a piece of technology, is unbelievable, right? A project management tool, but they're a unicorn. 4 years in, they've raised $135 million, and it's literally on the baseline of, well, I'm willing to give up X to receive Y, and therefore that turns me into a unicorn. And it's a very different game when you talk about acquiring actual physical goods businesses, because you are profitable. You do have physical products. There is a clear, it's not about it is about the potential, but the potential is much more real and realized. And you can actually, when you get to a certain point, you can self-fund much of it. So yeah, curious to hear your take on sort of the planning phase, right? So you're going through this whole journey. Like, what is that tipping point or that inflection point where, when you guys are operating, what are sort of those 3 to 5 year goals in terms of, well, I'm not going to ask you straight up what's the revenue goals or what are things of that nature. I know that some of these things are a little bit more tightly held, but I guess coming back to the nature of the show, right? Successful scales. We're talking about growing big businesses. So like, what are some of the practices that you would put into your day-to-day or your weekly or your planning to actually see that you're going to achieve these 3 to 5 year goals?
It's a very interesting question, because I think that changes quite a lot over the lifetime of a company. And even for us, this is like constantly changing how we do things. Let's be honest, when we started, we thought in days. So until Friday, let's achieve this and let's go for it. And then the week after, let's do this. And what we nonetheless now shifted towards too, we, for example, implemented OKRs also across some teams already. And OKRs, usually you plan for three months. And we started it and we were like, okay, we have no idea what 3 months is going to look like. So let's maybe start with 1 month. And now we actually did this only for 1 month. So we moved from weeks and days, now towards monthly planning, which we also then look on and every week. At the same time, though, of course, also monthly planning is not sufficient. So from time to time, you need to think about, okay, what do we want to reach until the end of the year? And what is our long-term plan really going forward in the next couple of years? And I think what's important is that you always mix this to some extent. Sometimes you need to zoom in and really focus on the next week and the next month. And then you need to zoom out and also look at the bigger picture. Because if you don't do that, you kind of lose track of what's really important, and you get so hung up in your daily tasks that this is not helpful. So what I would really recommend overall is play around with the tools and just also test out new things, especially when building a company. I think ultimately always OKRs are something that is extremely important, helpful. Because it has a lot of positive sides actually. So I can only recommend that, but switch a bit in between.
No, that's really great advice. We run on Traction EOS, if you're familiar, which is the entrepreneurial operating system, and you build your 90-day rocks and you build your sort of yearly plan and you go through this. But But just to take it a step back, you were saying that at first it was weeks, and then it was 2 weeks, and then it was months. And I think that a lot of I think it's the most ridiculous question that anyone can ask you, unless you've really been there and done it. And you've had 50 years experience or 30 years experience in business. It's very hard to project out what does 10 years look like when you've only been in business for 2 months. So, for anyone listening in, be realistic about how far out you're projecting things to actually look. And you need, we're a young business. We've been around for about 2 years. It's very hard. It was very hard for us to have a finite financial model 12 months ago and say, right, that's exactly how it is. You're always playing with aspects of it. So, I just really appreciate that going through it myself and trying to continue to project out. There's nothing more frustrating where people will ask you, well, what does the company look like 10 years from now? I just find that a little bit too hard to pin down at this point. But I'll tell you one thing that I did learn from one of the co-founders at Foundry, Stefan Haney. So he said, or one of the things that he educated me on is the way he looks at the world is, what do I believe to be true in 30 days from now, 3 months from now, and 3 years from now? So he sort of takes that track of, you've got your 30-day goals, you've got your 3-month objectives, and then you've got your, what do I believe to be a constant 3 years from now, and sort of working backwards. Because if you're not focused on the operational efficiency of what's going to happen in the next 30 days, then your company's going to fall apart. So yeah, definitely, resonates with me deeply. Yeah, absolutely. And to talk about some of your aspects, I think 10 years is always extremely hard. Yeah. And I mean, the environment that we are right now in it's so quickly changing. So, you can develop a vision where all of this leads to. Maybe it's correct, maybe it's not. I think sometimes there is a lot of value also in thinking about this. How does the world look like in 10 years from now, and what are possible scenarios? Yeah, and I think just sometimes the whole thought process really helps. But nonetheless, 10 years out is really quite a lot. I think something that is very often neglected is also this, maybe not first principle thinking, but how is the world changing? And we do this also when we think about companies. Yeah, so how is the world changing? And out of that, how is the world going to look like in 5 years, and what does it mean for the businesses we acquire? Yeah, we see so many deals, and you kind of get hung up in all of these deals, and you look at the companies, but sometimes you have to zoom out and really ask yourself the question: okay, what is going to happen with the world and consumer behavior in 5 years from now, and what does that mean for that particular company? Yeah, do we see this progressing or not, et cetera, et cetera? And this is what we are doing, and it really sometimes helps to get a completely different view on a company. Yeah, I mean, the notion of being an aggregator, I mean, you have to assume that consumer behavior has shifted fundamentally. We talk about the fact that e-commerce was pushed 10 years forward in the span of about 10 months is sort of the running theme here. And so if we build forget dependency, if we build something that's quite habitual, and that is now online ordering, because there is no other way to get even baseline goods. In Australia, you want to talk Australia for a second, which is where I'm from. It's absurd what is going on in that country right now in terms of the lockdowns and the limitations. And so without e-commerce, Amazon is less strong in markets like Australia. They're very slow to adopt, and probably a reason why I find myself in Tel Aviv, one of the fastest paced places on the planet. But what do you see as some of the things that have now fundamentally shifted from an e-commerce experience that aren't going back, that we're not going to see us resort back to?
Well, I think it's a lot of things. I think a lot of new people that never ordered online, are now ordering online. Also, I think new customer groups or with different demographics. For example, older people. So there is a lot that has changed. I'm really curious also to see. We all say, okay, everything has changed, but I think we're going to see only now in winter and then next summer how drastic this change really was. I think for all of us in e-commerce, it's a great time. And at the same time, it's also still just the beginning. If we look at how Amazon is in Germany, or now in Sweden, they just started, or Poland, et cetera, et cetera. So there is still huge potential. And really, we are still have extremely exciting times ahead of us, I'd say.
Yeah, I don't feel like the whole coronavirus is going anywhere anytime soon. They talked about sort of the respite. I mean, going through, living in Israel, being one of the first countries to have like the highest vaccination rate, we're already seeing regression back into new restrictions were created where we have to wear masks again inside. And, if it keeps growing at the rate it is with this new variant and all these things that are happening, then, you're going to see it progress into next year. So, my gut is telling me that we're not going to see the end of whatever this consumer behavior is for at least another year, probably two. And as a result, when you have that much time, when you have 3-4 years of this consumer behavior, it's just going to solidify what e-commerce is going to do to brick and mortar fundamentally. But I mean, I'm sitting here really interested to think, well, we used to go out and we used to go and shop to shopping malls. We used to go to, the strip malls and markets and all these things. I mean, what is going to happen to all of these, obviously historic trading places? What are we going to do with this office space or with this land? Like even from a dispersed teams and remote work, I don't know if you guys are going into an office at the moment or not, but I mean, there's just going to be such an interesting shift. I heard actually that Amazon is buying up a lot of these shopping malls and turning them into fulfillment centers because they're obviously central and arterial. But I don't know. Do you have any thoughts or positions on what the future might hold? I know I'm putting you on the spot here, but I'm just fascinated.
No, I think it's super interesting. I also, to be honest, don't have a lot of answers to that. So I think yes, fulfillment centers probably. I mean, what we see now also in Germany or generally is that we have these 10 minutes delivery services, right? And they're taking up a lot of space now in the city because they need all these dark rooms to have their fulfillment spaces. Yeah, so I think that is definitely something that is going to emerge. But apart from that, I mean, let's see. I think there's still like a lot of people still like going to shopping malls and going and then trying on things. Yeah, especially or fashion, for example. So maybe like this is also going to bounce back at one point. Yeah, and then some of the aggregators actually start doing retail location. Yeah, let's see what this might bring. But I think there's a lot of potential and maybe some things just bounce back. Yeah, so.
It's definitely going to be a very interesting, next couple of years. What's your take on what's going to happen? I mean, I don't personally like the way I look at sort of the aggregated business model. Yeah. I mean, outside of the acquisition side, obviously everyone's competing for a finite number of businesses that are in market today that can be acquired. Okay. So that would be, in my opinion, the truest sense of the level of competition that's going on, because I don't remember the numbers, but it's like probably billions of products or at least hundreds of millions of products that are sold on Amazon globally. The space is so big and it's growing every single day. What do you see as things that are going to happen to the aggregators? I've started to hear like there might be consolidation. It's going to be interesting, I think, how people have planned. And obviously we were talking about German efficiency before we jumped on and how somehow Germany always gets it right. But, what do you think some of the challenges that aggregators might see or what does the next sort of year or two look like in the landscape?
So I think it's going to differ a bit by by type of aggregator or also by size. Yeah, I think ultimately or most likely we won't see 60 aggregators or whatever the number right now is in the next 2 years. Yeah, so that number is definitely going to get smaller. I think for some it's going to be difficult to find targets to acquire. I think some definitely are also going to have issues in operations. Yeah, it's extremely challenging to run these companies. Yeah, and you need a lot of knowledge. You need a lot of people for it. Yeah, still, and it's not something that you can so easily do. And I think definitely some of these aggregators will have issues with that. Consolidation, I think to some extent, yeah. Curious to see how that develops. I mean, this is also what we've seen in other markets as well, where step by step, yeah, the big companies started to acquire the smaller ones. So that's definitely something that could also happen. And yeah, then I think one thing is for sure that it's probably not going to be, or most likely not going to be 60 aggregators in 2 years. Yeah, and I think there are many different ways what will happen with these aggregators. Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely fascinating to be actually thinking through what might happen, and we're in a pretty unique position with Escala, our consulting practice. I mean, we've now seen operationally we build SOPs, training videos, documentation for e-commerce businesses doing between $2 and $100 million. We'd probably be the only company on planet Earth that's seen inside of this many operations. And so, while we'll never share IP from one to the other, if someone builds, for example, a methodology around PPC, for example, or automation around it, that's IP. You don't change that. If there's operational structures or things that we learn or create, then yeah, sure, that's something altogether different. But I think that it's going to be the operations and how effectively people actually build for scale. That's when most people are going to come undone. So yeah, I'm definitely watching along. Just very interested to see. Do you think there's a reality? I mean, it just sprung to mind right now, but could you ever see you guys, for example, merging with another aggregator of a similar size, or does that sort of dilute the pool, and that's not really a smart move for investors?
Never say never. At the same time, I think we reach also now a size where it's not so easy to merge anymore. But let's see what happens there. I think it's not an extremely likely scenario, but never say never. I think for us now, we really come into like also size now with all of the brands that we acquired and also the operations that we have, that we are extremely confident on executing all of this. And I mean, as you mentioned, well, first, we're Germans. Yeah, so everything that we do, we really try to translate into processes as much as we can. Yeah, and this is now has really shaped over the last couple of months into something that we truly believe in. Yeah, and are absolutely confident on. So we are also just very optimistic about the future. Yeah, about how we can acquire companies, and then more importantly, how we can run these companies. So. Yeah, for
sure. And, when I put I was a former Amazon seller. I took an Amazon business from 2 to 5 million in 12 months, and it was acquired by Thrasio. And, I mean, I don't have that emotional connection to any of the businesses that I'm creating, which I think would be atypical. I think that I care deeply about all the people that we employ and the jobs that we create. That's the most important thing. That's the thing that I want to see live on. But I think for a lot of founders, it's their baby. It's the thing that they want to see live and grow and, live a long, enduring life. And so very curious to hear, when you guys are having conversations with these founders, I mean, are those the hot topics? Are those the things where people are really sort of cognizant of and are thinking, right, you're going to be the business to take me to the next level? Or is it more, well, give me the 3, 4, 5, 8 multiple and see you later? What's been your experience in those conversations about the things that make sellers tick?
It really depends, yeah. And this is the interesting thing also about doing acquisition in this space. You meet extremely talented and highly intelligent people who build their business, and it really depends. Some are more focused or definitely on the financial side and okay, give me the money and then I'm out. Yeah, because also I think for some entrepreneurs, it's when they do something, they do it 100%. Yeah, so they build it. Yeah, and when they sell it, they want to move on because they want to build the next business. Yeah, and for these types of sellers, it's really important ultimately. Yeah, what do you get as a base price, and then I want to move on, and they don't care too much about what's going on in the future or what we do with the brand. Nonetheless, I would argue that most of them still do care to some extent. Yeah? And I would say that almost for all sellers, and for some definitely more than for others, this plays a huge factor actually. And also when we have the conversations, a lot is around, okay, what are we going to do with the brand? Why do we believe in the brand? How can we grow the brand? What is our vision for the brand? Yeah. And what we really try with the seller also together is like, okay, let's map out what we do in the future. Yeah. Because this is for us super relevant, but for the sellers as well. And most of them are really happy then also afterwards when they see how their brand is progressing. And this is, I think, ultimately what, as a seller, what you want, as an entrepreneur, what you want to see.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at my notes from really early on in the conversation, and one of the things that I wrote down was that it's very apparent that you're a high achiever. It's about how do I continue to evolve, iterate. You've built a ton of different businesses. I mean, what motivates you to sort of go again, or what's the sort of the underlying motivate? Like, is it I want to prove that I'm building the best aggregator, that we're going to do things the best, or is it the glory? Is it the financial outcome at the end of it? Is it to really complete this project and then move on to the next one? Like, what's your sort of burning desire?
Yeah, it's a good question. And actually, it's one of the questions that I always ask in my interviews. Yeah. So what makes you stand up in the morning? It's one of my favorite interview questions, actually. So for me personally, so there's one side of me that is competitive very much. Yeah. So when I do something, I obviously want to be like extremely good. I want to be the best. Yeah. So I think that's definitely one side and one trait. And I think this is also what we generally have at Razer. Yeah. When we compete, we really want to be successful and we want to be number one. I think for me personally, it kind of goes back to what we discussed earlier. Yeah? I'm not so much driven by like financial needs, etc. I just love seeing how things grow. Yeah? And every morning I can stand up and like, okay, I just want to do these things today, so that at the end of the day we accomplished something and we made further progress. And I think that the target is constantly changing. I mean, when we started last year, we said, okay, like it's a great model, let's do it. Potentially we want to reach XYZ, and now we're like 5 times above the target that we set when we started. And so I think it's always a moving target, and you constantly have to adjust. But I really just love doing that. So
yeah,
it's also. Yeah,
I was going to say it's having this chat with you, it's becoming very apparent, sort of that incremental improvement, and how do we continue, how do you continue to go bigger, iterate, evolve, and grow, both personally and professionally on a business level, talking about the evolution of what it looked like a week in, 2 weeks out, 2 months out, a year out, and now that you're 5 times bigger than the expectation. I mean, if I had to guess, it's never going to stop, and there's going to be, well, now we can do it 10 times and 50 times bigger. I think that is like the blessing and the curse of the consummate entrepreneur.
It is. And it's also, that's a lot of fun. Yeah. So, I mean, in acquisitions in April, we started talking around, okay, so what do we want to reach like 1 year from now? And then we said, okay, let's go for this extremely ambitious goal. And let's divide it up into the next 12 months. So that was around end of May. And then we kind of set the target for June. And what happened is, like, what's an extremely ambitious goal? Actually, not to be reached. But then we suddenly jumped over it. And now in July we did it again. And it's kind of that. It's the fun about it. So you set this goal. You look in the future, and then you say, okay, we want to go there. And then you get there a lot faster than you anticipate, which is great.
I'm enjoying the ride. I'm loving the conversation, but I am seeing that we're coming to the top of the hour now. And I do want to give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about, any potential sellers that are looking to sell their business. I mean, if someone wanted to get in touch with you, Jonas, what's the path? What are you looking for? Who can you help? Who's the market? Give the people what they want to hear.
I mean, if you want to reach out, it's pretty easy to find me either on LinkedIn or just also personally write me an email at Jonas I'm going to reply to all of these emails. I mean, what we look for, it's kind of I hope that became clear in this conversation. We look for great businesses where we also see potential and that we can further grow. I think for us, always the entrepreneur or the seller on the other side is extremely important as well. Yeah, and it's very often about sharing the same values, sharing the same vision, and doing something together. Yeah, so we don't see this really as something extremely transactional where we go and look at the financials and then we buy a company and then we do some arbitrage whatsoever. Yeah, that's not really us. Yeah, what we are about, like the entrepreneur on the other side, understanding how you build the company, and then what we can do together with this brand and how we can grow it in the future.
Fantastic. Well, mate, it's been an honor and a pleasure sitting and having this conversation. I'm energized. I'm excited to continue on. And it's also nice to be chatting with someone on a similar time zone for a change. I'm not up at all hours of the night. So that's much appreciated. But mate, really, thank you for taking the time, sitting down. I'm sure people are going to get a lot of value out of what it takes to actually build a business as large and as ambitious as what Razor Group is looking to achieve. So thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was a pleasure. And we also have to meet at one point. So either in Tel Aviv, Berlin, or also the US. We're actually, one point I want to mention, we're planning some sort of Oktoberfest in the US because we're Germans and we also have operations now in the US. We said we're going to do this later in the year. Yeah? So when you hear this, also drop us a note and then we'll meet there.
Well, I'm always looking for excuses to travel, and Oktoberfest is something that I've actually never been to in Germany, but I'd love to try it in the US. So let's see how you guys go. But very cool. And if not before, get over to Tel Aviv, or I love Berlin's just an incredible city and one that I'm dying to get back to. So I'm sure we will cross paths pretty soon. But thanks again.
Cool. Thank you so much.